Hey, it's Mary Maru, and today I want to show you how I crop and optimize stock images for Divi website. This is the first in a series of how-to videos on preparing images for the web. In this one, I'm going to be using Photoshop Creative Cloud, and then in the next two videos, I'll demonstrate how to use an amazing web-based app called Canva, and then finally, how you can use Mac Preview, which comes standard as part of the software bundle on your Mac. Right now, we're going to get to work using Photoshop Creative Cloud. For the demo today, I'm going to be prepping a header image for a Divi website. I know that the ideal dimensions for a full width header image for Divi are 1920 pixels wide by 1080 pixels high. And even though I'm customizing this header image specifically for Divi, the steps are basically the same for editing images that you're preparing for the web for any sort of application. So I want to make sure that the image is at least the dimensions of 1920 pixels wide by 1080 pixels high. The one we're working with today is actually 7360 by 4912. Obviously way larger than we actually need, and that's perfect. Because if we want to crop the image differently, for example, if we wanted to zoom in more on the hiker, we could do that and still have our desired width of 1920 pixels. You never want to use a source file that's smaller than the final dimensions, or you're going to lose image quality and end up with a blurry or pixelated photo on your website. In Photoshop, you can check the image's dimensions by going into Image size. Alternatively, you can use the shortcut option Command I. I chose an image from Unsplash.com taken by photographer Ashley Nedler, and I like that it has a lot of white space around the subject. So as visitors see this header image on smaller screen sizes, they should still get a really good experience without the hiker's head getting cropped out. You can learn more about some of my favorite stock image sites in the article Where to Find the Best Images for Your Website on my blog. Now that we have our image dimensions worked out and we have a photo to work with, we want to create a new canvas using our full width header image dimensions. You're going to do that by opening a new file in Photoshop by clicking on File, New, or you can use the shortcut Command N. You can name the file right here. I prefer to name the file when I'm saving it, so I'm going to leave this just as is for now. You want to enter in, first you want to make sure that the dimensions are set to pixels, and then enter in your width and height dimensions, which are already filled in here for me at 1920 wide by 1080 high. You can leave the rest of the default settings as is, because when we save, or rather when we export the file later on for the web, all of these things are going to be filled in the way they should be. So I am now going to click Create, and I have this lovely blank window. So the next step, we now have a new file ready to go, and we also have the stock image file open on our desktop here. We're going to separate the two files, and I will do that by clicking and dragging first I'm going to click on the top tab of my blank. This is my blank document, so I'm going to click and drag it until it becomes its own independent window. And so now you should basically have two separate windows. I want to make sure, I dragged it over pretty far because I want to make sure that I can see them both at the same time, regardless of which window is active. Now I am going to click and drag the image Let me just get rid of that. Make sure that I have the move tool selected. So we are going to click and drag this image over to the window. And we know that It's happening because the new document window has come to the front. So I'm just going to let go of my mouse to drop it, and the image has been copied over into this new window. We can't see it though because the image is a lot larger than the canvas size right now. So in order to see the entire image on the canvas, I'm going to hit Command +0 and make sure when you do this that the Show Transform Controls box is checked. And you can see what the outer parameters are of that photo with the hiker. To resize the photo so it fits in the new window, I'm going to hold down the Shift key and drag with my mouse. And there we see the hikers showing up. And then I'm going to repeat the process in the lower right corner until the image looks the way I want, so that it's framed the way I want it to be framed. And I actually like the way it looks based on the default guides that Photoshop is revealing with these pink lines. So I'm just going to let go of my mouse and let it sit there. And then hit Enter to accept all the changes we just made. Since we're not actually cropping the image, you know, we still have some real estate to play around with, even though we've entered the image telling Photoshop that it's where we want it to be. We still have some flexibility. The only thing that you don't want to do at this point is you don't want to enter the image changes and then go back and resize it larger, because you're going to end up with a pixelated image. Once you make it smaller, you don't ever really want to make an image bigger. So step 4 is we are going to save our image. Now that our hike photo image is at the size we want, it's time to save it for the web. We're going to select File, Save, or use the shortcut Command +S and name the file. I'm going to put this on my desktop just to make it easier to find. Header, maker, 1820 by 1080. Name the file. I use a specific naming convention to help keep my images organized. You can use whatever naming system works for you. Now that I've named it, click Save. And so now we have our edited image in Photoshop file. And I like to keep a version in Photoshop in case we want to go back and make further edits later on. So now we're ready to export this file for the web, which you can do by clicking File, Export, Save for Web, or use the shortcut option Command-Shift-S. In the new dialog box that pops up, I like to work in the 4-up view, which shows me versus the 2-up view, or just the optimized or the original. So I like to use the 4-up view, which shows me the original Photoshop file and then 3 versions of the file in JPEG format at different levels of quality. So this is the original, this is the optimized image at 100% quality, which you can see over here, and it's set at the maximum. Here's a version that is at medium size with quality of 50, and here is a version at the low image size with the quality of 25. We could change the file format to a PNG or a JPEG in this window, but actually for photos, JPEG works the best for preserving quality at the more compressed file size. The goal with header images is to try to keep them around 100K, and the smaller the file size, the better for your user experience and for Google rankings, since Google's algorithm includes site performance among lots of other things. You can zoom in to these 4 views by clicking on the zoom plus and minus buttons here in the left bottom corner. So when I zoom up to 300%, I can start to see a little bit of like artifacting and fuzziness around the edges of the hiker, which I don't notice in the optimized JPEG up here. And I don't really see any problems, maybe very, very slightly, in this medium-size version. We're actually going to be working with the medium-size version ultimately because the 81K file size is the closest to our goal of having an image around 100K, plus or minus a little bit. We'll get back to this in a second. There's something else I want to check besides the hiker, because the hiker is really, if you remember, takes up a rather small bit of the full image. I want to just check and see what's happening, if anything, in this blank space. So to navigate over, I'm just going to drag a bit. And I can see already in this smallest file size how much artifacting and jagged edges are happening. I'm just going to zoom in a little bit more so you can see better what I'm talking about. I don't know if you can notice that, but there's like these jagged edges as I get closer and closer to the landscape on the bottom. There's the edge of the rock. So here's like the mountaintops with the clouds, and this just looks really pixelated and jagged. So because most likely with a header image like this, we're going to overlay some text once it gets uploaded to our website, we want to make sure that background stays really smooth. And so I am seeing a tiny little bit of jaggedness and artifacting in this 80K sized file. So I'm going to go to the quality slider and I'm just going to bump it up a little bit just to smooth it out, and I feel like that's actually pretty good. So I only moved it up 4 points to 54. My file size is now about 102K, which is plenty big. We really don't want to go much bigger than that. So I think we are ready to save. And I'm going to keep the file name the same. Go back to my desktop and save. You can follow these same steps for images that go any place on your website. The only real difference is going to be the photo dimensions, and there's definitely more than one way to use Photoshop to prep your images for the web. I prefer using this method of cropping images to size because I rarely receive from clients or find stock images that are the exact right size. And doing it this way lets me see how the image is going to look cropped and still have the flexibility to move the image around in Photoshop so I can frame the image exactly the way I want. So I really want to encourage you to prep images before uploading them to your website, and I hope this video showed you why prepping images is so important and gave you some useful tips on how I use Photoshop to crop and optimize images for the web. If you enjoyed this video, if you found it useful, please let me know in the comments. I'd also love to hear if your image prep process is similar to mine. I'll be making 2 more videos for this short series and will demonstrate this same process, instead using Canva and also Mac Preview. I hope you'll come back to watch those. See you then.